Hey everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of the Seinfeld Law Discussion, where the writers behind the very hit successful blog SeinfeldLaw.com get to talk about what we're writing about between the analysts behind the show. My name is Zach, and along with my co-host Aaron,
Hey, this is Aaron.
we're going to be discussing our recent publication, what we just wrote today, called "On the Race and Contract Law," and whether Duncan is obligated to compensate Lois for the trip to Hawaii that he promised if Jerry wins the race.
Now, Zach, let's set up the scene first. So, if you're not familiar with the episode, basically Jerry starts dating a woman named Lois who works for his old high school nemesis Duncan, who Jerry had beat out somewhat controversially in the big high school race. And Duncan challenges him now, decades later, to re-race to prove himself as the superior Superman of the high school community. And right before the race kicks off, Duncan, somewhat braggadociously, with a lot of bravado, tells Lois that if Jerry beats him, he'll fly her out to Hawaii for 2 weeks. And what we're discussing now is that line an legally binding contract that he makes with Lois? Zach, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I don't think it's going to be legally binding. I mean, this is pretty basic first year law school that it's a gratuitous promise, meaning Duncan says something, but Lois doesn't provide any consideration in return. So I don't see how Lois is going to have a basic contractual case. It just seems more or less cut and dry that promises are generally not enforced in contract law. Judges are going to say, you made a promise, but you don't have to keep your promises under most contractual principles.
Yeah, and I basically agree with that. There's a lot of the elements of a typical contract are met here, but ultimately Lois doesn't provide anything of value in return for Duncan's promise. So, if you've read our post and if you've read prior posts of ours, you'll recognize the legal term consideration, which is that both parties in making a binding contract have to provide something of value to the other one in order to bind them by the terms of the contract. Here, though, Duncan just says, somewhat off the cuff, "Oh, I'll fly you out to Hawaii." But Lois doesn't give him anything in return, so Duncan isn't bound by what he says. And so, therefore, yeah, I agree with you, Zach, that this is going to be considered a gratuitous promise. It's not a legally binding contract. But there's a wrinkle here, which is that there's this equitable principle of promissory estoppel.
Well, hold up. What is an equitable principle? What does that mean?
Oh, okay, so... Well, Zach, why don't you take this one, actually? I think you're much better at explaining it.
All right. Well, so generally, an equitable principle, basically, what would the court? It's usually it's in contract law terms. So basically, what would the court do absent, contractual agreement to determine what the outcome would be? And the reason why courts do this is basically just saying that we don't have any guidance either in the law or in a contract to tell us what to do, but we think that this would be most appropriate given the circumstances of the situation.
Yeah, it's sort of like a fair is fair kind of idea as opposed to like the strict legal understanding.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's the best way to describe it.
Yeah. So what do you think about that principle here? Or actually, I guess first we should probably explain for those not familiar what this actually is. And what sort of the elements that have to be hit in order for this principle to be applied. Which would be the following three principles. So there has to be a clear and unambiguous promise. So meaning somebody actually has to, say pretty clearly that they're going to do something for the other person.
Like, we're going to the Yankee game next week. I got tickets. Are you in?
Right, exactly. Something like that. And then there's got to be a reasonable reliance on that promise by the other person. So, in other words, if you're offering me saying, hey, you want to go to the Yankee game? I'm getting tickets. And then I decide to all of a sudden buy bus tickets in advance, or I buy, food vouchers in advance. I do something that shows that I'm relying upon your promise to me. And then the third principle is that it would be unconscionable or unjust injury to not enforce that promise. So, in the example that you just posed, because I've now expended money, so it's not really fair to me that I put all this money out there based upon what you said that we were going to go to the Yankee game, so it would be unjust to me to have put that money out without, now going to the Yankee game in return for that. So let's break it down here then, Zach. You want to take over?
Yeah, so look, I mean, what does Duncan say? So Duncan says, if Jerry wins the race, I'll give you a raise and I'll fly you out to Hawaii. And so we're basically saying, he can't. Lois has no claim on the a contractual claim for saying I'll fly you out to Hawaii, but maybe she has a promissory estoppel claim. Now we have no evidence in the show that she actually did anything in reliance on this. She doesn't say that she bought plane tickets or she bought, rented a hotel or a car. So this is just all hypotheticals. But I think that she would be able to get from Duncan, airfare. If she had said, "Oh, you said you're going to take me out to Hawaii," she had to get for hotels, and she'd probably be able to get a car rental. Because those are all things you're going to do normally in advance if you're going somewhere on vacation. Now, other things you do on vacation, you go out to eat at restaurants, you might go in for entertainment. It doesn't seem likely to me that she'd be able to get for that. You don't generally put out money in advance. So if she had, paid like a deposit at a 5-star exclusive restaurant, that seems like something that's more unlikely. Most people don't do that. Usually, you just go to a restaurant when you're on vacation, whenever you have the chance to. And same with entertainment, because Duncan says I'll pay for you to go to Hawaii. But he doesn't say I'll pay for you to go to Hawaii and I'll pay for you to do everything that you want. He just said I'm going to send you to Hawaii. So what are the things you need in Hawaii? You need a plane ticket, you need hotels to stay, and you would need a car to get around or transportation costs. And those are things you would pay for in advance. But anything that you would incur on the island or entertainment costs, even if she booked in advance, I don't think that she would be able to get compensation for that from Duncan if she had paid for it in advance. But Aaron, I think you have a little bit of a different approach here.
Yeah, so look, I agree that if she put down money to buy those airplane tickets, and then Duncan later on says, I was just kidding around, I didn't really mean it, then Lois could certainly get the money back for the airplane tickets because she would have reasonably relied on Duncan's promise and put out money for the tickets. I think where we're differing now is in terms of, beyond that and in the interpretation of what flying someone out for 2 weeks actually means. So pretty strict. I'm going to take a pretty strict approach to Duncan's words here, that he's really just saying, I'm going to fly you there. So, and the 2 weeks is more of like a thing about how much time she's going to be able to take off. So, plane tickets, he's obligated for. But hotel costs, which it sounds like you're advocating for that Duncan would owe her, I'm not going to say that Duncan would owe her for that because that's not really covered under the words of what he's saying when he says that he's going to fly her out there for 2 weeks. And then certainly I think we're in agreement that other activity costs, restaurants, scuba diving, going to the luau or anything like that, those are the things that are going to be up to her to pay for. But the plane tickets, I think under promissory estoppel principle, that's something that Lois could recoup from Duncan on if he reneged on his words.
All right, well, I got one more thing to ask. What do you think about the fact that Duncan says, I'll send you to Hawaii? He doesn't say, go book a flight to Hawaii. He just says, I'll send you. So how could Lois reasonably rely on that statement to go book hotels and airfare and all this stuff and then turn around and say, hey, you owe me. You said you're going to go send me to Hawaii. And Duncan can easily say, yeah, I'll buy you a plane ticket. I didn't say go ahead and book all this stuff and get reimbursement.
Yes, that's actually a really good question then. So if Lois took that initiative outside of really what Duncan was saying, can Lois then turn around and be like, hey, you owe me for this, when Duncan's like, well, hold on, I was going to make the arrangements? That's a pretty good question. Off the top of my head, I think that Lois would have a real problem with that, because Duncan, by his words, it really sounds more like that he's going to be the one to make the arrangement. So if Lois takes that initiative, that she's really stepping beyond what her legal entitlement is then. So Lois actually, I know in the post, and we have 2 posts coming out that are debating this, I took the position that she would be under promissory estoppel entitled to it. You're making a good point now, which I'm struggling with to think about. I don't know. This is where law gets fun, is how we could parse through the language.
Yeah.
If you're listening, and hopefully somebody's listening, hopefully you'll send us a message either by email, through our blog, or hitting us up on Twitter at Seinfeld Law, spelled Seinfeld, Seinfeld, Law, Law. Hit us up with your thoughts. Do you think Lois is entitled to airfare if she jumps ahead buying the tickets on her own? If so, what legal theory? Is it a contractual theory? Is it an equitable promissory estoppel theory? Is she entitled to more? Hotel fares as well, activities, restaurants, and can she take Jerry along with him on Duncan's dollar? Hit us up on Twitter, Facebook, email, and please subscribe to the blog. Thank you so much for listening to this inaugural Seinfeld Law discussion, and we hope that you'll continue to listen to us in future episodes.